All right, let's go over Melisandre. I feel like I say this every time, but Melisandre, it was a huge undertaking. I feel like maybe it was the most difficult chapter we've had so far. It was strange, and I know some people were kind of upset that the next chapter dealing with the wall story wasn't live at the time, and that things were told more in retrospect. Um, but of course, that is kind of George's style to tell a lot of things in flashback and retrospect. A lot of times he skips over big action sequences and then tells them later in a calmer manner. Um, Plus, I went over like what would make the most sense because you have to understand that the Winds of Winter begins with four big battles going on, and you could add another fifth battle, but at this point it's just so many battles. But Melisandre can't be in the middle of the battle. She would have to be like watching from a window, and that would be kind of boring, just her sitting there watching events sort of unfold, and not everything she could necessarily see, and things like that. I don't think it would work very well. So I really did feel that having the events of the wall be told in flashback and retrospect was the way to go. Um, but yeah, Melisandre in general was pretty darn difficult because there's just so many plot lines and there's so many characters at the wall that you kind of have to deal with. Additionally, coming up with a narrative that makes sense. Like a lot of people finish A Dance with Dragons, and the fans have been talking about this for years. Like, what is Bowen Marsh's plan? How did he think this could possibly work? What would be the logical situation? How would the Queensmen and the Northmen and the Night's Watch and the Wildlings all act in this situation? What has been seeded? And so we did our best trying to take all of the dangling plot lines from the many John chapters, because we're talking 13 John chapters and a Mel chapter, like setting up the wall and all of the little things, the giant, the boar, the the shield hall, um, the ice cells, Cregan Karstark and Alice, like all of these little things are set up over many chapters, and they all kind of have to be mentioned and come into the plot here. And so it was really challenging. Not to mention, you want a chapter that has some sort of emotional connection to the protagonist. So all of that is being done. So the chapter is pretty long. A lot went on. I think people, pretty pleased with it. But it doesn't have, admittedly, I don't think it has the same emotional connection and oomph as some previous chapters, like say even Asha or Bran or something like that, where you're really within the character's head and feeling the hurt that they're feeling. Considering that like Melisandre is wondering about Stannis and things like that, could there be more to her emotional insecurity and things like that? Absolutely. But there was just so many events that needed to happen here that the story is just kind of go go go. So it's her visiting everybody at the wall and putting the entire story in order while trying to move it forward. It was challenging, but here it is. Melisandre. It began as something falling from the sky. I knew I wanted to open with a vision like the previous Melisandre chapter, but you have to make it different enough. One thing as well is not reusing the same words from previous vision, with regards to fire and flames and ash and all these sorts of things. You want to make it different enough. One of the submissions had this line. It began as something falling from the sky. Um, the submitter didn't, it wasn't their first line, but it was in the middle. And I was like, oh, that's a good way to start. So I took that as the start. It began as something falling from the sky. And of course, we get to not falling, flying, kind of reminiscent of Bran, with regards to falling and flying. And next we get the first vision here. The ash drifted over the hearth fire, veering this way and that upon pale wings. Then it dove after its prey, an ember red and glowing, and clutched the fish tight in its talon. Starting the sentence on one thing and having transformed into another thing is something I kind of took from George's writing style from a story he wrote called The Pear-Shaped Man. But you can kind of see at the beginning of the sentence, it's diving after an ember, red and glowing, but then that ember becomes the fish tight in its talon. The idea is that we have this red fish. The pale ash is a bird, and so the idea is that this is kind of representing the veil taking the riverlands. Is this idea that Aaron taking the riverlands with Tully, but I understand that like the Tullys aren't currently ruling the riverlands, but the fish is more of that symbol of the riverlands. You could also talk about it getting into Robert Aaron's Tully side or Sansa's Tully side, and the importance of taking those Tully possessions of Riverrun and Harrenhal. Harrenhal because it's through Catelyn's mother's side. But nonetheless, that's the first vision, in case you didn't pick up on it, that it's the veil taking the riverlands. A veil of crimson flame billowed before the vision, then one of bronze and one of amber, all flowing like the finery of dancers, weaving together into a knot of fire-made silk. It's just this idea of the flames being these ribbons and things like that, trying to be poetic. All at once it unraveled, and there they were. A boy, blackened and burnt, stumbling down a road, 1,000 hungry mouths at his heels. This is, in case you didn't figure it out, it's supposed to be Quentyn. In fact, all three of these are across the Narrow Sea plots. We will get to what exactly is going on here with the 1,000 hungry mouths at his heels and stumbling down the road, but this is what's going to happen in the next Quentyn chapter. An old man armored in white falling to his knees on a beach, a kraken's arm tight about his neck. This is, of course, Barristan and Victarion. And we'll get into that in the next Victarion chapter on what is going on here. And then a girl, a hunter, spear in hand on the trail of a horned man. And this is Arya and Braavos, the horned man being Dunsen, because Dunsen had taken Gendry's helmet. It's amazing how many people actually picked up on that the horn was. I saw a lot of comments like, the horned man, it has to do with Gendry. But they forget that the helmet was taken by Dunsen, who's on her death list. So she's hunting Dunsen. A Minotaur, could that be Stannis? So what's funny is Minotaurs do not appear in the story, except for once there is a Minotaur on Dragonstone, but we don't hear about any mythical Minotaurs, or no one tells stories about them or doesn't think they exist in the world, like say giants or mammoths or things like that. So she had prayed to see him, begged the Lord of Light for any sign, but Minotaurs were only creatures of myth. Fables told by crones in the Shadowlands. The Shadowlands are the lands around Ashai. Had there been a gargoyle of one somewhere in Dragonstone? There is. Which is mentioned in I think it's in the I forget if it's in the Crescent prologue or if it's in Davos chapter. Was that it? A log shifted with a crack, and the air came alive again with cinders. Beyond them, figures moved in the smoke, emerging and fading 100 times over. None of them clear until she glimpsed a door. Little reminiscent of the house with the red door here, that Melisandre too is thinking about her childhood at a more innocent time. There was a knock. Enter, a young girl called out. The voice was her own, that of a girl named Melanie. In case you don't remember from the previous Melisandre chapter in A Dance with Dragons, we hear of a girl named Melanie and Lot 6 or something, essentially. And so this idea is that Melanie is actually Melisandre, and that she was a slave girl bought by the Red Temple, and that her real name is Melanie. Not established as fact in A Dance with Dragons, but here we're going with it. We're going with it. Some people had other theories that Melanie was, some girl she sacrificed that she feels guilty about, or something like that, or some soul, some body she stole or something. But no, we're just having Melanie as Melisandre. That's it. The hinges creaked and she held her breath, hoping to see some home she'd long forgotten. The hinges are a bit reminiscent of Aeron. But on the other side of the smoldering wood was only the ash of the hearth. Within the ash stood a cliff, white as chalk. Snow? Of course, you're supposed to think of Jon Snow here, but also like she's looking at this chalk of this cliff of chalk that's white as chalk. It's actually salt. The cliff is made of salt because this is Salt Cliff. But is what she's actually looking at. But she sees it and thinks of snow. We're supposed to think of Jon Snow and all sorts of things. A sun rose above the bluff as it crumbled the dust blowing away in the wind. So the idea is that Salt Cliff is falling apart here. And this gets into what's going to happen in the Hotah chapter, with Salt Cliff being a character there. Men are here, my lady, said Devon. Black brothers. Devon Seaworth is, of course, her assistant, so he's there. But he's kind of here just to throw in the word black so that she's reminded of the word black. She's like, black. The sun blazed dark as night behind a cloud of ash. A black sunburst on white. What she is confusing here is the black sunburst on white is a dark star. The dark star is the thing causing the end to Salt Cliff. But she's confused and she thinks it's the white sunburst that she's seen that before, the arms of Karstark, only its colors reversed. Was that what it meant? Cregan Karstark was here at the wall, imprisoned in an undervault beneath the Lord Commander's tower. Many people don't think that Cregan Karstark is very important. I wanted to pull him into the story. Cregan, of course, is captured by Jon, and he's visited by Jon in the final chapter of final Jon chapter of A Dance with Dragons. So I feel like Karstark needs to come back in the story. He has to be important. He's there for a reason. So we need to pull him in. And Melisandre needs a reason to go visit him because he's kind of an irrelevant figure. He's just a random dude in a prison. So what would make her want to go see Cregan? Well, there's a couple reasons. Maybe the Alice Karstark thing and her Thens, but also her vision is going to draw her to Cregan, and Cregan's going to play an important role going forward. Is she dead? Someone whispered. Dead! A raven cawed. Dead, dead, dead! This is something I didn't even think about during the chapter call, but one of the submissions had the raven. And I was like, oh, right. Mormont's raven. Of course, Mormont's raven should be in here. So we have Mormont's raven on Ulmer of the Kingswood shoulder. Nah, this first person saying is she dead is Emric. And so no, she's breathing, a second man answered, his voice raspy from age. Is Ulmer just asleep? And with her eyes open, this is Emric still talking, and he says, eye with him open, you never slept that the way on the watch? Maybe you did, never knew it. This is actually a little reference to that Melisandre doesn't think she sleeps. She believes that she doesn't need sleep anymore. But I wanted to ground this a little and say that she just doesn't believe she's sleeping. But in fact, she falls asleep all the time. But she's just, she's staring into the flames and she doesn't know that she dozes off, is the idea here. That there's one thing about the Melisandre chapter in A Dance with Dragons is that they scaled back George scaled back Melisandre's magic quite a bit, and you realize that she's actually quite a bit of a charlatan. And so the idea is that we want to make her even more of a charlatan, but ground her a bit. And so the idea of humans not sleeping it's just a ridiculous notion. I personally, I just didn't like it. And so here, the idea is that Melisandre sleeps all the time. She just doesn't know that she's dozing off, like falling asleep on a chair, or falling asleep standing somewhere. So this is why he's like, maybe you did and never knew it. But here we get into a story. Ulmer has said that he tells stories all the time, but we actually don't even have any Ulmer stories. So here we actually get Ulmer telling a story. And he says, in the Brotherhood, we had to, just in case the Smiling Knight found us. If he caught us with the eyes closed, he'd bug you right then and there. Got Osmond a couple times, and Ben too. These are members of the Kingswood Brotherhood. Oswin is, when do we hear about Oswin? Oswin Longneck, the thrice hanged. Oswin is supposed to be kind of a precursor of Beric Dondarrion, this idea that he's been killed many times. But yeah, Oswin is a character, and then Ben, his full name is Big Belly Ben, so, and that he has some sort of story about a high substance goose. But and then Wenda White Fawn, she's the one that brands Merrick's butt. But here, he's like, oh, never Wenda, clever girl that she was. She had eyes tattooed on her eyelids, you see, as this idea that she never looks like she's asleep because she has eyes tattooed on their eyelids. It's a silly story. We're not, the idea is we're not sure if it's actually true. And here, this is Sweet Donald Hill being dirty. He says, oh, a woman after my heart, quipped a third man. I like a girl who looks at me when I'm taking her. As if, this horror is actually quite dark. This idea that, like, if, he's having sex with this woman and she's closing her eyes. And so if she's has eyes tattooed on her eyelids, it looks like she's staring at him anyway. Should have had the back of her tattoo, have tattooed the back of her head to boot. The idea is that he's taking her from behind, and if she has eyes there, then she's looking at him too. But then Melisandre, at this point, Melisandre finally turns, and the idea is that she's kind of disgusted by Donald a little bit. Emmerich flinched, Sweet Donald Hill gasped, but Ulmer of the Kingswood only shook his head. Alive, told you. The three brothers of the Night's Watch stood before her in varying states of wretchedness. Ulmer's jaw was still bruised a deep purple, though it was only half as swollen as it had been before. Sweet Donald wore a wound from cheek to collarbone, sewn up about as well as a girl's first stitching. This I kind of thought about Arya here, but it's just there. Emmerich forced to kill his own brother. This is the idea of like all of these twins seem to kill each other in ice and fire, fight each other in ice and fire. So, for instance, Jaime and Cersei having this like conflict, or Arik and Eric from Fire and Blood, House of the Dragon. So this idea that they were on opposing sides and forced to kill each other is just, of course, another thing. So, because Emmerich and Arik come from. Is his brother named Emmerich? I forgot his brother's name. Emmerich, is it? Emmerich and Aaron. I'm sorry, not Arik. Emmerich and Aaron. So he would have killed Aaron. Anyway, but he feels bad about it. His eyes bloodshot. His scabs marked his scalp where he'd torn his hair out in grief. The only one looked well was the great raven perched on Ulmer's shoulder. What is it you require? She asked them. Sweet Donald Hill stepped forward, parchment in hand. We had a raven. Raven. So we're trying to come up with, someone that would do. It just makes sense that Clytus would be hanged. So who do you have left to deal with the ravens? Well, Sweet Donald Hill was part of Chet's conspiracy. So the idea is that Chet, he was actually also, I think, part of Yeah, he's the only survivor from Chet's conspiracy. He planned on killing um uh he planned on or he I mean I guess there's still a few north of the wall that are alive at Craster's Keep, but he's the only one that came back to the wall that was part of Chet's conspiracy that no one knew. I mean, no one knew about Chet's conspiracy. Chet's conspiracy was a secret and was never implemented. So Sweet Donald Hill, even though he had planned on killing Mormont and betraying the Night's Watch and all of this, he never had that opportunity. So he's just kind of existing in the Night's Watch. He even supports Jon Snow during the election. So Sweet Donald is a funny, dark, mysterious character who should have been part of a mutiny, but then the mutiny didn't happen. The Chet's mutiny, I mean. So the idea is that, Sweet Donald Hill knew Chet, and so from Chet he would learn about the Ravens. Plus, Sweet Donald Hill is a great character. You want him out here. So he says, "Raven, not you," he snapped at the bird, "a different one." The blonde steward handled them now, Melisandre knew. With Clytus hanged, the Night's Watch needed a new man to tend the rookery, and Donald's dead brother Chet had supposedly taught him enough of Ravencraft to make do. From Greyguard. All right, so this is where we get into we wanted to jump into the plot of what is going to be driving the Wall story in the Winds of Winter, and that is the Weeper, the attack on the from the Weeper. And so the idea is that they're coming from Greyguard. Let me pull up a good map here. So, and I imagine that people reading this would pull out a map because and the idea is that Melisandre is getting confused too. So here's our map of the Wall. And so she says, this is funny because she says, Greyguard. She tried to remember which of the Wall's 19 forts that was. Had she passed it after Eastwatch by the Sea, or was it some castle in the west? She nodded as if she knew. What news from there? This is just kind of fun. Like, this chapter ended up being a lot funnier than I thought. There's just so many little jokes in here about how much Melisandre is faking it. So she's confused because the one by Eastwatch by the Sea is called Greenguard. And the idea is that they crossed at Sentinel's Stand, and they're heading east. So we're going to see, I wanted to include as many of the forts as possible, boom, 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 going down the line, because this is like the idea of the story is that they're going to be taking forts. So the idea is that from Greyguard, somebody sent back a raven. It would probably be really difficult to send a raven to Greyguard, but if you have Castle Black ravens, you could bring them to Greyguard and they can come back. But sending things to Greyguard would be, you can't get a message to them. You get messages from them because, no one's trained a Greyguard raven for, I imagine, hundreds of years. So, but this is the whole thing. She's confused. The reader is probably confused too. Who knows where Greyguard is? So you pull out the map and you're like, oh, Greyguard's here. And she's like, oh, wait, are they talking about Greenguard? No, Greyguard. And she says, what news from there? And then she's like, oh, your flames didn't show you then? Asked Emmerich. We'd hoped they had. The idea that Melisandre doesn't see everything. Was that insolence? We try to get the attitude of Melisandre in here. Melisandre kept her gaze impassive. There were always some who resented her for what she'd seen in the blessed flames and what she hadn't seen. To be chosen by a Lord was to be doubted and feared and hated by those of weaker faith. The Lord of Light may send a sign or he may not, she answered curtly. It is not my place or yours to presume on his will. Kind of the kind of answer she would give. So Sweet Donald's awkward, so Sweet Donald coughs. He's like, as it were, milady. Greyguard's under attack. He offered the letter. Some of the Weeper's men climbed the wall at Sentinel's Stand, and they launched an assault from the west. The garrison fended them off, but another strike's coming sure as snow. This is just a little saying we added in here that sounds like it would come from Westeros. Oh yeah, sure as snow, like meaning it's certain. Sure as, some people say like sure as day or something in our world, but sure as snow. Our castles weren't built to be defended from the south, and Greyguard's only got 60, or is only 60 men strong. That 60 men figure actually comes from a Dance with Dragons when he talks about manning up Greyguard. The next wave will be bigger, more wildlings scale the wall every day, the ones fit enough to climb. And so this is, this is setting up the whole plot that they're going to Greyguard and heading east. But why wouldn't they head west? Well, here's the reasons that we give. Well, so the Shadow Tower can't help, added Ulmer. Sir Dennis Melisandre, has got his hands full with raiders at the Bridge of Skulls. So she'd been right again. The attack at the Bridge of Skulls had been a diversion. This is a joke because she does say that the Bridge of Skulls was a diversion, but she's talking about she had seen the towers by the sea. And so John's like, do you mean Eastwatch? And she's like, yeah, it's Eastwatch. The towers by the sea is probably down in the three towers in the Red Wine Straits, probably having to do with the Battle of Blood. But she just kind of lies and says, yeah, I think we're talking about Eastwatch. And he's like, what about the Shadow Tower? And she's like, well, that would only be a distraction. So here the joke here is that she was completely wrong about her vision and what it meant. But here she's patting herself on the back for being right, even though she was wrong. And this is just like Melisandre's like arrogance here. She always thinks that everything is correct when she was just wrong. So she's saying, oh, the Bridge of Skulls had been a diversion. She got that right. But it turns out the Bridge of Skulls was a diversion for an attack at Sentinel's Stand, and Greyguard. So she's like, Jon Snow was a fool for not trusting her wisdom. She has no wisdom. She was completely wrong. It's the joke. Skulls, daggers in the dark. These are different visions she's had that she tells Jon Snow. But he would not hear. Now he lies dead. So then there's no way to pass the wall out west, not for the bulk of the wildling force. Ulmer continued, only smaller bands can cross the mountains to get to the Bridge of Skulls. That's not in the text, but there is a So Spake Martin where someone asks about the Bridge of Skulls. Like, what is that? And George says, no, it's only like, it's really hard to get to. And, you have to like cross mountains. It's only for like small groups of raiders. In A Dance with Dragons, it seems like there's a horde of people heading across at the Bridge of Skulls, and that Bowen Marsh and everybody dealt with a big onslaught, which kind of goes against what George said here. But I'm trying to, if the Bridge of Skulls was so easy to cross and you could just send 1 million people over there, why wouldn't they have done it? Like George's original explanation that it's very difficult to cross the mountains to get to it, like, makes sense. So we put that explanation in here. That only smaller bands can cross the mountains to get to the Bridge of Skulls. And the gate at the Shadow Tower has been sealed since the mutiny. It just seems like Dennis Melisandre in a panic would probably do something like that. He hears that the Lord Commander's dead and people are attacking at the Bridge of Skulls. Yeah, he's going to seal the gates, So, but that, it seemed logical. And then also, well, that means the wildlings have to keep heading east. Like, it doesn't matter if they get over here. If they want the bulk of everybody to get over, they've got to get to Castle Black or to Eastwatch. So that sets up the whole, we get to use all of the forts, and we get to have this, as I say, like this ticking clock, this of them heading towards them. And then Melisandre says, oh, they're near the gorge. She kind of figures it out. And no towers by the sea then, because her vision was completely wrong. She tried to picture exactly where these foes were. East, you say? Again, we're kind of helping the reader too with Melisandre, like not knowing what's going on here. East, answered the Raven. Yes, to us. After Greyguard falls, they'll hit Stone Door, then Ice Mark. Hoarfrost Hall is not, or Hoarfrost Hill is not manned, and thus he skips over them. Hoarfrost Hill is abandoned, and he intends to garrison the castle, but he doesn't do it. There's I think he's still in the last John chapter. He still talks about it being unmanned, so that's why they skip over that. So it's Stone Door. He passes over Hoarfrost Hill, then Ice Mark, the Night Fort, and all the forts along the wall. After the Night Fort would come Deep Lake and Queen's Gate, and then Castle Black. It's here at Castle Black where they'll try to get the rest of the host through. Will you seal the gate as well? Asked Melisandre. That was what Bowen Marsh had wanted, but Jon Snow had turned a deaf ear to his pleas. Perhaps the Hang Steward had the right of it. And I think in the future we will see the sealing of Castle Black's gate, because eventually it's just going to keep marching all the way to Eastwatch is the idea. Get the story to Eastwatch. Not yet, Ulmer said. We still have rangers out there, Kedge and Daiwen's lot. This is pulling in, yes, these rangers were sent out. We need to remind the readers that these rangers exist. They will come into the story. We haven't forgotten about them. But yes, this is, Alistair Thorne, Kedge, Daiwen, they're out there. The Rangers, 9 of them, then 6. How many remain now? Sockets Weeping Blood. In the Melisandre chapter, remember the 3 heads are put in front. The Sockets Weeping Blood, she'd seen a vision. And so this is kind of bringing back to this. That was how 3 of them had died, and Jon Snow had asked about the rest. Eager to prove her worth, to win his trust, she searched the flames again, looking for them, for the sister, for the long-lost uncle. Now she knows that, where is actually Arya? She'd looked for him before and saw Alice Karstark, but here she's looking for Benjen. This is just a reminder that Benjen exists, but she'd seen nothing, blind as the Weeper's kills. Do what you think is best, Lord Commander. Ulmer of the Kingswood stiffened at the title, then glanced at the hearth. You saw that, did you? And of course, she's going to bullshit and lie and convince everybody she has more powers than she does. She hadn't, but she gave one of her smiles all the same. The truth of his command was so apparent even the raven knew where to perch. The Night's Watch, and it's true. If Mormont's Raven is sitting there, he assumes that this guy's he assumes this guy's the Lord Commander. The Night's Watch had been in need of new leaders after daggers and nooses had done in the old. This is just kind of a way to say that, Jon Snow and then Bowen Marsh and Alpha Yorwick were killed by nooses had done in the old. But the brothers were in no shape to hold an election now, with the Shadow Tower imperiled and Cotterpike missing. You need the other 2 towers to be part of the election. So the frightened children sought the comfort of an elder. Yeah, we worked on this wording a bit. I originally wanted to have a joke about Sir Wynton Stout, going around being I'm in charge, and maybe he will next, because Sir Wynton Stout is put in charge of Castle Black during the battle at Castle Black in A Storm of Swords. So the joke is that Wynton Stout still thinks he's in charge, and I kind of wanted that, but it doesn't really fit. If she knows about Sir Wynton Stout saying he's in charge, but him not being in charge, her the reveal of her knowing that Ulmer is Lord Commander doesn't really work. So maybe Wynton will run into Wynton later. But so the frightened child sought the comfort of an elder. This is just her guessing that he was put in charge without 100% knowing. Not to the witless Sir Wynton Stout, of course, but to this fatherly old ranger with his endless tales and keen eyes. You've merely been named what you already were, she intoned, meeting his eyes with her own. That's the thing, milady, Ulmer said. I might command the Night's Watch here, but that won't be enough against the Weeping Man, will it? In case you don't know, the Weeper and the Weeping Man are just alternate names. They call him the Weeping Man sometimes and the Weeper sometimes. More than a third of our garrison died in the mutiny. And here we get sort of the backstory here. How much, generally what happened. We have scarce enough men to guard the food stores. Now we know kind of what's going on. They're guarding the food, let alone the whole castle. There isn't exactly trust between the Black brothers and our guests at Castle Black. Emmerich put in. And this is just something that's very obvious. So Sweet Donald kind of says, a dozen is 12, the wall is cold, and everyone hates the watch, Sweet Donald said. I kind of took this from Lazy Leo says something in A Feast for Crows that I thought was, when somebody says something very obvious, he's like, the exact quote is, let me get to it. He says, "The sea is wet, the sun is warm, and the menagerie hates the mastiff." So it's like, everybody. It's obvious. It's obvious that everybody hates Marwyn is what he's saying. And so, to be funny, he's like, the sea is wet, the sun is warm, and the menagerie hates the mastiff. So in the same sense, Sweet Donald's like, a dozen is 12, the wall is cold, and everyone hates the watch, is the similar kind of thing he's saying. It's very obvious. And so now we're establishing the setting here, because there's just so much going on. So we've introduced now, like, the problem. The Weeper is coming. Here's the big issue. And now we have to establish, like, well, what is the state of Castle Black? Well, the Queensmen, the Northmen, the Free Folk, we have our factions, along with the Night's Watch. They come to us for rations, true, but will they follow orders? Hold the wall for us. Ulmer spat. Queen Selyse is proud. Old Flint and the Nori are stubborn, and more in a white mask. This is the first mention of, like, what's going on with the wildlings. It's only a matter of time before she attacks us herself, whether we got her son in hand or no. That's just a reference to the fact that the hostages were taken. So at the end of A Dance with Dragons, it's important that they're mentioned like that. There was some talk of whether or not, like, one of the hostage boys would be with the guards, with the Night's Watch when they came in to visit Mel. But I felt that the room was a little too crowded already. I mean, you've got 5 people here, because Devon's there. "You have a honeyed tongue," said Donald. "We figured you could talk to Queen Selyse for us. Make her listen. We'll need her men by her side against the Weeper, and she knows the King Garrick, doesn't she? Remember there's a big deal at the end of A Dance with Dragons with King Garrick, like, announcing, like, them dressing him up and wanting to marry his daughter to Axel Florent. So we kind of need to have King Garrick in this plot. So, the Night's Watch comes up with this idea that, okay, they can't talk to the wildlings, but the Queen's men know the wildlings a little bit. So maybe, the Queen's men, you could talk to King Garrick. He messes it up by calling him King Garrick. Obviously, it's Garrick Kingsblood. But Donald's dumb. The Hand wants to marry his daughter, I heard. Got a taste for wild ginger. This is this idea that she has red hair, and she's a wildling, so he has a taste for wild ginger. That's the joke he's making. And Emmerich doesn't think it's really funny. He's just like, oh, God. What he means is that Garrick Kingsblood could treat with the masked witch. He could treat with more in a white mask, who is described as a warrior witch. We tried sending Leathers to her, but the wildlings don't respect him much. He's no chieftain and a crow besides. No, we sent Jax, Donald corrected. Leathers was killed. This is just kind of a joke about the different wildlings who then become part of the Night's Watch. And so Leathers and Jax, like, were 2. So that we just kind of, it's of course something like, somebody in the Night's Watch might confuse them, and Emmerich does. So Donald's like, no, we sent Leathers. And he's like, oh, right. Or we sent Jax. Oh, I was Jax, but the result's the same. So Leathers is dead. Jax is alive. Ulmer said, I should mention the Northmen too. They're few, and I don't know who could talk with them, with Big Little slain. And Big Little is slain. We killed Big Little specifically because we didn't want someone to talk to them. Like, the idea of, like, oh, how are we going to talk to these Northmen? Well, we create this problem that we need solved now. But every sword will count. And what about that Karstark girl? She could send her Thens back to us, couldn't she? This is to bring in Cregan again. And Cregan just, got to be important. So, Karstark. The vision was fresh in her mind. Lady Alice had gone south with 200 Then warriors to retake her home. Now I do think, looking at and what's funny is that this always kind of bothered me about the end of A Dance with Dragons, that Jon Snow would just assume that Karhold would open their gates to 200 Then warriors. And it's like, they've established that, like, that, it's like having something, it takes 50 people on the outside to deal with one person on the inside, or at least that's Winterfell. But even if it's like 20-1, like, they must, the garrison's probably more than 10 people, like they could probably take 200 people. 200 people is nothing. They're Karhold is supposed to fall to 200 people. So it kind of making fun of the end here. Jon Snow being an idiot. Jon Snow believed the castle would surrender, but most likely the army would die upon the walls. So she's just like making fun of him, foolish boy. Did he think Roose Bolton would open the gates of Winterfell to his pack of wildlings as well? That's another thing. Like, say Jon Snow took 2,000 wildlings south with him to Winterfell. Does he, like, that's nothing. How is he getting past the walls of Winterfell? It's just kind of ridiculous. So it's, we're lampshading some silliness from the end of A Dance with Dragons. And Mel is like, what is Jon Snow thinking? Anyway, whatever happened at Karhold, it would happen soon and be done. Their kindling feeds this fire, but how? This is just her, talking in her fire religious way. Ulmer was still talking. When you think about it, it's in our interest to work together, isn't it? It reminds me of the time old Dick and Sir Simon, this is Simon Toyne, and was that Dick Dollard? I'm trying to remember who that is. Old Dick. Fletcher Dick. I'm so sorry. Fletcher Dick. Old Dick and Sir Simon caught wind of this chest of gold dragons that Prince Rhaegar was smuggling. You see, had the coin made it to Old Town, and here we're just kind of so the story, what we heard before, we did hear this story of them, Ulmer getting stealing a kiss from Elia Martell when he was stealing some dragons. And I'm trying to remember. And there has been some fan theories that maybe that it's really weird that these dragons were that this chest of dragons is being brought across land. Like, what's going on? And so some people theorize that Rhaegar was bribing some people in order to overthrow his father and call a great council. So the idea is, let's see. Yeah, it says here, Ulmer claims he once put an arrow through the hand of Sir Gerald Hightower, Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, in order to steal a kiss from a Dornish princess, presumably Elia Martell. He stole jewels and a chest of coins. Ulmer helped, so what were they doing? What were they doing with this big chest of gold? And so this idea, I'm playing into the idea that Rhaegar was going to try to bribe the Hightowers or something. And that Ulmer kind of realizes this and makes a calculation about what this means for the realm and stuff like that. The details I haven't hammered out, but I just wanted to kind of like put in there that something was brewing, and that and that strange bedfellows were kind of put together, that like Ulmer did something perhaps in line with King Aerys, even though he was against King Aerys, and wanted, and was causing trouble in the Kingswood, obviously. Lord Commander, the men quieted as if she'd screamed. Had she? I have their ears, but what good are the ears of unbelievers? And here we're just kind of establishing Melisandre's personality here. She needed hearts. She needed swords and spears and axes. This was a war. This was a war for life itself. But what did she have here at the wall? Free folk for the most part. Wildlings. Melisandre had long believed them unimportant. Dying people, cripples and panders. Hardly the ranks of steadfast soldiers needed to face the great other. And this is all established in the previous Mel chapter, that she thinks that the wildlings are dying people. She thinks that Mance Rayder is pathetic because and like useless. Like, what are you doing? Your people are dead. Like, it's stupid. But here she is now leading an army of them. These people that she thought was unimportant, which is the irony of it all, right? And she's like, well, why hadn't the Flames ever shown them? Because she's thinking that the wildlings are so unimportant that R'hllor didn't even tell her about him in the Flames. But then she's like, oh, except they had sockets weeping blood. So she kind of realizes that the Weeper and the wildlings and everything are part of this. They're important. R'hllor had warned her. He had shown her the way, as he had done so many times before. What would she do without the Lord of Light? What would she be without the Lord of Light? Only a slave named Melanie, trying to bring in her past a little. She says, I will speak with the queen. And so part one, she has talked to the Night's Watch. And so now we move on to part two, the queensmen. You know, she's eventually going to hit kind of all the parties, right? Here at the wall. So she says, I'll speak with the queen. And we're going to get pieces of what happened slowly. So Melisandre of Asshai ascended the king's tower, climbing steps still stained with blood. And here we kind of had to piece together, if you were the mutineers, what would you do? Well, you know that the mutineers are certainly trying to appeal to King Tommen and the Lannisters. So they would certainly try to get a hold of Selyse and Shireen. So here they are, of course. So they would go. Yes, you killed Jon Snow, but now you know you need to go up the tower and get the queen and princess. So Melisandre of Asshai ascended the king's tower. On the top floor were the queen's chambers. The door flanked by two of her knights. Sir Dordan the Dour rested his chin on the tower's shield. Every one of the named queen's men gets named in this chapter. So like they're all at some point named. Whether named and killed or named and alive, but every single previous established queensman is mentioned here. So in this chapter. So Dordan the Dour rested his chin on a tower's shield while Sir Perkin followed leaned against the wall. When they saw her, they stood at attention, my lady. So they're obviously still tired. Not recovered yet, even from the fight. R'hllor, forgive their sluggishness. And so here she's given him a break because they actually did really well. The two fought bravely on the night of the mutiny, defending the queen, princess, and priestess, while many of their brothers were slain before their eyes. Her own one-armed sergeant had been among them. So Melisandre has a bunch of guards, personal guards. Only two of them were named in A Dance with Dragons, Morgan and Meryl. But she has a whole bunch of others. But they're all low quality, left behind. And they were led by a one-armed sergeant. The idea that how useful is this one-armed dude? And that's why it gets left behind. Because all the healthy men were taken with Stannis, right? So, and it's, she was given a bunch of, cravens and drunkards and geldings and stuff like that, rapers. It's just she's given the rejects, and so we hear a little bit about some of these rejects. So her one-armed sergeant, who was mentioned in the Melisandre chapter, is killed, as her guard Meryl was, dying as he lived, well drunk. So one of the drunkards. A half dozen others fell in the tower, but not in vain. None of the mutineers had reached the top floors. The queen's men had died elsewhere too. Sir Malagorn of Redpool had fought the giant, had his chest crushed in by the kick. Another shout out In the yard, an arrow had found the chink in Sir Lampert Whitewater's armor. Another shout out. Sir Bruce Buckler had been pushed up the wall of the switchback stair. This is the idea that if you were the mutineers, what would you do? Well, you'd try to go up the tower. You'd try to be on top of the switchback stair to have a high ground. And so the Queen's men have to fight their way up the switchback stair. And then 2 other bodies were found, both on the livery of Sir Patrick of King's Mountain. One was freshly slain on the stair's 4th landing. The other is a mutineer's ruse, a long frozen corpse costume to frighten the giant. I have a little theory video on this about Sir Patrick and how the corpse wasn't really him, but I didn't really want to harp on it too much, and keep Sir Patrick around. Just have him be dead anyway, but dead in a different place. So the fact that they find 2 Sir Patrick bodies. The idea is that when we this is all comes from the fact that when you hear descriptions of Sir Patrick, he has a certain description of what he wears, and the body that's getting scraped around by one. The face is unrecognizable. And yeah, he's wearing stuff that's all starred and stuff, but it's not the same. The designs are all different. So the idea is that the stewards sewed him some of their costume and they pulled out a frozen corpse from the ice cells. The ice, these frozen corpses are all mentioned in A Dance with Dragons, and we wanted the plot to at least go somewhere. So the somewhere is, yeah, they used one of the frozen corpses to frighten the giant, to cause a distraction so that they could kill Jon Snow and get a jump on the Night's Watch. And that the whole Sir Patrick is trying to kidnap Val thing is, why would Sir Patrick be that dumb? I understand that it's established, but it's also really stupid. Why would he do it then and there when his queen specifically tells him not to at the end of A Dance with Dragons? So it's the idea is that Sir Patrick wasn't dumb. He wasn't trying to kidnap Val. He was, it was a frozen corpse the whole time. Within the chamber, as Princess Shireen was still asleep, with the snoring fool Patchface at the foot of her bed like a dog. Patchface is, of course, the biggest Chekhov gun in our story. I don't want to draw it, I don't want to. He's gonna do big things, but the idea is that he's here. He's a big Chekhov's gun. Something is going to happen with Patchface, and so we need to have him mentioned here that he exists in this world. Across the room, Queen Selyse and Sir Axel were speaking in hushed tones as a serving girl laid a platter of hard-boiled eggs and roast boar before them. Yeah, we often forget that Queen Selyse comes to the wall with a whole bunch of serving girls and lady companions, and they're there. They dance at the wedding and stuff like that, but people don't really think about them, so we kind of had to mention that. No, they're there. And so here we have, they're eating boar. And this is, of course, like George R. R. Martin food porn. We always have to have food. The flesh of the hero. The pork was well charred from the cook fire outside the tower. The drunkard Morgan's work. This is another one of her guards. The other drunkard is Morgan. Now he's being the cook. All of Captain Castle Black had been left to prepare their own meals now after the execution of the three-fingered cook. So people were really sad the three-finger Hob died. In A Dance with Dragons, Three-Finger Hob does complain that he was a cook for the Night's Watch, not a cook for wildlings. And so from that line, I'm like, well, I guess he's a mutineer. So I understand that people don't like it, oh no, Three-Finger Hob, but sorry, he said something that was reminiscent of he said something that was mutineer sympathetic, so he's a mutineer. So he was hanged. Queen Selyse looked up from the table with pleading eyes. Have you seen him? There's no question of whom she spoke. Now, I will say that Queen Selyse's personality here is way, way different from the Queen Selyse that we've come across in the past, specifically the very demanding Queen Selyse from the Clash of Kings prologue. She is really demanding in that. She is, I mean, she's bad in the Dance with Dragons, but she's not as bad as she is in the prologue of the Clash of Kings. But here, she's just a completely changed woman, meaning that the pink letter really struck her hard. But we have, maybe next time we run into Selyse, she'll maybe have recovered and be back to her old self. But here, she's very different. Have you seen him? There was no question to whom she spoke. I have, Your Grace, Melisandre lied. The prince that was promised will return to us, just as warmth returns in the spring. We know we've got to get into prophecy stuff and like the way they exist. This is a bunch of zealots sitting around talking to each other. And what do zealots sit around? What do zealots talk about? Well, they like to compete in their piety. Good, Selyse said. Good. I dreamed. Who knows what she dreamed? She trailed off, lost in thought. The queen needed coddling, Melisandre knew, but she lacked the patience this morning. There was business at hand. It may be many moons until the king's advent, however. This use the word advent here because people speak of Jesus' advent, the advent calendar, in case you wonder why the chocolate calendars at Christmas time are called advent calendars. Advent means a timely return. Maybe many moons until the king's advent, however, and Castle Black is imperiled now. A wildling force has scaled the wall and is on the march. In a fortnight, they'll be upon us. The one thing I was worried is that people would be upset that the plot is repeated 4 times. Is it even 4? No, it's 5 times. The plot is repeated 5 times in this chapter. Maybe it could have somehow done it without, but she tells that the Weeper is coming. The Weeper is we're told that the Weeper is coming 5 times. But because she goes to every party. You glimpse wildlings in the flames. So the queen seemed confused. The Lord command. This is kind of a joke too, because everybody just gets the wrong idea about everything. She hears wildlings and she's like, "Wait, I thought the wildlings are huddled in caves in need of rescue," because she's thinking about Jon Snow talking. The last time Jon Snow talked to her, she said, "Let them die." She was talking about Hardhome, like, let them die. We don't need to go out to Hardhome. And she's like, "What? What are you talking about? They're huddled in caves in need of rescue. Now they rise up." And so, no, at Hardhome they very well may. And what Melisandre here thought darkly, she's talking about them rising as whites, is rather than rising up in rebellion. But that was best left unsaid. A different band, she explained. These free folk are led by the weeping man, though it's his victims who weep. Queen Selyse considered her words. Should we retreat then, return to Eastwatch by the sea? But of course, Sir Axel is a zealot. Sir Axel crossed his arms. It's best we stay, Your Grace. This is the war for the dawn, after all. We must be fire. And steel, Melisandre added. The Lord of Light has made it our duty to defend Castle Black until the king's return. A duty we share with the others, whether they be Crow, Northman, or Wildling. But Stannis requires a lieutenant, a leader to ready the castle for the coming battle. I suggest the Black Brother Elmer. He is a veteran ranger and well-liked by his men. And of course, Axel is against this. This is the conflict that how will they all decide on a single leader? Who fits the desires? So here Axel's objection is they need to be a follower of the Lord of Light. And so he's like, Elmer the Brigand, to lead, I would think not. The king's own brother would terrorize the realm for years. There must be someone of better repute. I would lead myself, but these outlaws do not love me. Love me not. What about Alf of Runnymud? Alf of Runnymud, of course, is a follower of the Lord of Light and a mutineer. Alf was hanged for treason, she might have said, but instead she answered, he died, my lord. Someone else, then, he said dismissively, perhaps one of the other converts in the watch. So one thing, it's not mentioned much, but there are converts in the watch, and there's converts among the wildlings. And so Mel has night fires, and people come to her night fires. And so this is this idea that she hears things, she hears the gossip at her night fires, and that's why she's so well connected. And that's why she kind of knows what's going on, is that the different people, whether the queen, if there's, they say, "Oh man, there's no connection except for them coming for the rations." Well, in fact, there is one small connection. They come to the night fires, and so in many ways, the night fires make Mel the best leader because she has a connection to the different groups that come to her, and she can hear the gossip. But of the Black brothers, few attended her night fires, and none of those who did commanded the same respect as Ulmer. She considered the alternatives at hand. Iron Emmett is fearsome as he's patient, I've heard, and he has somehow made the spear wives at Long Barrow obedient to his commands. This is kind of a joke that maybe Iron Emmett is fucking one of the spear wives, but this is also just a reminder that Iron Emmett is running Long Barrow. And he would probably be a really good leader if he were at Castle Black. As she spoke, Sir Axel shook his head. There's Tim Stone as Tenacious Soul, one of the few to make it back from the Grand Ranging. This is just kind of a shout out. Tim Stone is not really mentioned very much. I think he's just he makes it back to Castle Black, and then he's never heard of again except in A Feast for Crows appendix. And so we just kind of go, he's still there, so we just give him a shout out. Or perhaps Lord Snow's own steward, Satin. Of course, we're going to talk about Satin. The men dubbed him, yet he fought valiantly during both. The both is going to be the battle for Castle Black and then the mutiny. The two things that Satin fought well at. No, my lady, none of them has accepted the Lord of Light. This is the big thing. The ruler. So remember, if we go through this chapter, the leader must be one who has accepted the Lord of Light to please Sir Axel. And then he has to be someone who frightens people to please the wildlings, and then it also has to be someone that the Night's Watch kind of likes as well. So, or is willing to talk to as well. So the idea is that Melisandre is the one that kind of fits the bill better than anyone else. That if you're trying to please both Sir Axel and Morna White Mask, the only person that's going to please both Sir Axel and Morna White Mask, and everybody else is going to be Melisandre. You must see what I see. We have strayed too far from R'hllor's path. What else explains why we've suffered so? The king's death, the mutiny, the storms. Their punishments for following the will of Jon Snow. So it's clear that Sir Axel believes that Stannis is dead, but will come back to life. Selyse fears that Stannis is dead, not coming back. Melisandre is different. Melisandre secretly believes that the pink letter is fake. So there's different things going on in these people's heads. But Axel is convinced that Stannis is going to come back from the dead. Selyse is wavering. But this is very different from what Melisandre thinks. But here, does Sir Axel think himself a priest now? Of course, this has been Sir Axel's personality for a while. Melisandre could only sneer at his arrogance. Jon Snow was an unbeliever, Sir Axel finished. A worshipper of trees and a warg, not to mention a bastard and oathbreaker. I'll say it. It's for the best the boy is dead. It's kind of a meta line. Like, is it for the best that Jon Snow is dead in our story or not? Shame no one killed his demon wolf. And this is important that Ghost is still alive, because Ghost is going to have a very important role going forward. Yes, the dire wolf. Jon Snow's pet was gone. Its whereabout a mystery. Fulk the flea, said Ghost, was last seen in the armory, but after the mutiny, the building had proved empty. The beast most like snuck out the open gate amid the chaos and fled into the haunted forest. But that did not quell the theories. So the idea is that this was important, that the Ghost gets north of the wall. And so we kind of needed to invent a reason why and how he would be able to get out there. I mean, how he got out of the armory is a mystery, but not everything needs to be answered. But so here we have some stories on what happened to Ghost. The queensmen said the Northmen ate him, while the Black Brothers fear he might be roaming the wormways, hunting for prey. Those are both, pretty funny. But then some whispers that have it more fancifully, that he has changed into a white-haired man named Grow, a trapper amongst the free folk no one claimed to know. And that's just kind of funny. Like, who's this Grow guy? Like, you know, and it's kind of there as a joke. And if maybe something will come of Grow later. But when I showed this chapter first to Carmine and Trey, they both like clung to this. They're like, who the hell is Grow? Like that was like the big question they had. Like, who's this Grow? It's like I kind of put it in there as a joke, but maybe Grow is somebody important. Maybe Grow is, I don't know, Stone Snake. It's hard to say. You know. We must redeem ourselves, Sir Axel's sermon went on. Only then will Azor Ahai return to us. Only then will the stone dragons wake. This is getting back to prophecy. The stone dragons waking, a lot of that text was deleted from A Dance with Dragons. In previous versions, they really focus on the stone dragons waking. So we want to get back to that because the need for sacrifice gets to the idea of the stone dragons waking. That is the primary reason for the sacrifice. Of course, you know, Danny already did that with Miri Mastor and all that. So Queen Selyse stood, blinking back tears. You must excuse me. I have matters to attend to. She gave a nod to Melisandre and was soon out the door. The serving girl rushed after her. Yeah, that was really the point of the serving girl is one, to show that they were around, but two, like when Queen Selyse leaves, like no one's gonna let the queen wander by herself. Someone needs to attend her. So like the serving girl is like there to attend her. With the queen gone, Melisandre glowered at Axel. I will need to humble this one, but what would be the quickest way? Before she could speak, Sir Axel let out a sigh. My niece, she believes him dead, you know, forever dead, so she mourns like a widow. The letter was poison. And as part of this chapter, I knew I wanted to get a lot more backstory about Melisandre in here. So this was a chance to do that. Melisandre of Asshai was shielded from such dangers. Again, like getting to the fact that like explaining how Melisandre does some of her magic. So some people are like, oh, she used magic to like cleanse the poisons from her system in A Clash of Kings, and that's how she. But it's like, why don't we just have her be immune to, you know, pull a Princess Bride here that she built up an immunity. So long ago, a girl named Melanie had been fed powders from different vials. Mere motes at first, enough to kill only a mouse, but then more and more over time. So here we have building up an immunity as an explanation, like a real world explanation for how she's doing it. But then, you know, there's costs. Then we get some dark lines here. It made her barren. So like feeding these poisons to her, like made her barren. That's horrible. But then, but that's for the best. One of the priests would have otherwise gotten her with child, which is like super dark. Like, it was for the best that she went barren because she was getting molested by the priests who had at the temple, and they would have gotten her pregnant. Like and so now we're getting to like how rough like Melisandre's life is, and how this line, like she can take something really rough, like being made barren by poisons, and then be like, well, it's for the best because I was getting molested by people at the temple, and they would have gotten me pregnant, and that would have been even worse, you know. And so this is like a really like grueling, like kind of punch, like on like something from Melisandre's past. But the seasoning saved her life countless times since. And then I wanted to get a Cresson shout out. She thought of old Maester Cresson. He had loved Stannis as a son, but she loved him as king. It was fitting they toasted their god together, a display of faith for all to see. The Lord of Light cleanses poisons from the veins of true believers, Melisandre said. The letter was a test. So this is kind of her lie that it wasn't the Lord of Light. It was the fact that she built up an immunity to these poisons. The letter was a test. And here he says, the test I passed. The queen wavers, but the hand is steady. This is the pun. A steady hand. The hand is steady. Stannis will return. He helped himself to an egg, biting it into it. Think about your eggs, your stone dragons. Stannis Still, this coming danger concerns me. Although faith burns brightly in our hearts, the Lord of Light demands it bursts forth, does he not? I've heard there's power in King's blood. So, you've got these power in King's blood. Of course, you're going to first go to Garrick King's blood. If you're talking about power in King's blood, right? Garrick claims to descend from a waddling king. No one has seen him for days, though. Wah, wah, wah. And there's Mance's boy, too. This is all established. Like, one guy's called Garrick's King's blood. Of course they're going to think about him. Mance's boy. This is Jon Snow specifically was fearing this, which is why he did the baby swap. And if we can wrest him from the Northerners, this is explained later. I mean, the baby was with Val, but the idea is that the wet nurses got him away. And his eyes darted at the stirring shape under the covers in the corner. And here we have this idea of, oh, are they talking about burning Shireen? I wanted to keep it ambiguous on what exactly Melisandre feels about burning Shireen. She lifted her hand to shush him. He has grown far too bold. Perhaps they should share a cup of wine. So what she's talking about murdering Sir Axel here. She's talking about her, Crescent, that they need to share a cup of wine. There's a time and a place for such rites. The day is nigh, but not today. On the morrow, we may need to find Garrick King's blood. That was unlikely, and that's because Garrick is gone. She knows he's gone, but she saw no reason to prolong the conversation. I have no need to listen to men who know less of her lore than I do. Not anymore. Oh, man. So anyway, there's a lot more. I'm going to take a break here, and we'll get back to going over the rest of the chapter next time. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.